This is the Ancient and Medieval History Lecture for Monday, the 18th of April, 2022. What's the MS? So, where we are is we've talked about the preliminaries of the Dark Ages. We talked about the Byzantines, and we talked about the Muslims. Now it's time to talk about us. Or should I say, our cultural ancestors in Dark Ages Europe. Our Western civilization, who we are, is born now. It's not a result of the Caesars, except indirectly. It is now that it's happening in the ruins of the destruction of Rome. So, our earliest iteration as Western civilization is going to be called Christendom, which means, obviously, the realms of the Christians. Because that is what's going to define us, our Christianity. And that is going to become the ante that allows you to join our game. In poker, in order to play in a particular game, you've got to put in an ante. That is a basic bet. As you will find, the ante of joining Western civilization is adopting the Christian faith. That is what defines us. So, you modern Americans who've learned that religion is optional and purely a matter of personal choice and has nothing to do with public life, and the most famous words that never appear in the Constitution or any of the founding documents, the separation of church and state, none of that matters. None of that is the case. What matters is that the core belief that holds our Western civilization together is up at the outset, and for most of its time, the Christian faith. Laura?
Huh?
Not this time. Okay. I believe you. So, in fact, Christianity is not an option. It is not an extra. It is not one of those things that we might or might not have. There are two basic rules to the Middle Ages in Europe. One, you are what your daddy does. And we've talked a little about that. Your identity is inherited from your father. Whether you're lower or upper class, whether you are going to be educated or privileged or not, whether people are going to take you seriously in certain circumstances. This is purely a matter of birth. It is secondarily a matter of ability. You are what your daddy does. You were born into a role. If God hadn't wanted you to do this, He would not have had you be born in a particular family. So, your job is not to be a rising star. It's not to grow in power and status and wealth and get rich and get powerful or wealthy. Your job is to be a decent, good Christian person in the place God put you. That's what you're supposed to do with your life. The meaning of life is serve God, love Him above all else, love your neighbor as yourself, give unto Caesar what is Caesar's, give unto God what is God's. It is the establishment of the first from the ground up Christian society. That's the first. The second basic law of medieval society, in addition to you are what your daddy does, is God and His church are at the center of all things. God and His church are at the center of all things. So, in our life, yesterday was the holiest day in the Christian calendar. Christians believe that on Easter Sunday, in the year 33, Jesus of Nazareth, after having been crucified, stabbed in the chest, and prior to that beaten practically to death, rises from the dead, is resurrected, and begins teaching His followers His final lessons before ascending into heaven on Pentecost. That's bigger than Christmas. That's bigger than any other Christian holiday, because the resurrection of Christ is the miracle of miracles that to Christians demonstrates that Christ is Lord. And yet, as Emma said at the beginning of class, it's wonderful to work on Easter. In the United States, we used to have blue laws. We still actually do in many cases. Blue laws are obsolete laws. For example, there are still places where if you're driving a vehicle and you see a horse coming towards you, you must pull your vehicle completely off the road and take your vehicle partially apart so that the horse can pass in peace without getting spooked by your car. Yeah.
In Missouri, it's still legal to kill Mormons on sight.
Yes! There you go. Wait. Now you know where you can go for holiday. Missouri. All I learned about Missouri, I learned from Kansans. And if you know the relationship between people from Kansas and people from Missouri, they hate each other like Irish Catholics and Protestants hate each other, like the French and Germans hate each other, like the Chinese and Japanese hate each other. Okay, like the Poles and Russians hate each other, like any neighbor of the Russians and the Russians hate each other. Because, yeah, Missouri, I didn't know that. So one of the standard blue laws across the country until the 1960s or 70s was that everything is closed on Sundays. No stores, no businesses of any kind. The only things that remain open, obviously, are emergency services like hospitals, police, fire. Everything else is off duty. Everyone else is off duty. Why? To worship. Now, we have a 2-day weekend here in the United States. The other day is Saturday. Sunday is the Christian Sabbath. Saturday is the Jewish Sabbath. Actually, Sunset Friday to Sunset Saturday. Now, we have tiny numbers relative to the population of Muslims, but there are people talking about, why don't we have a 3-day weekend? We'll have Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, because Friday is the Sabbath for Muslims. Who knows? Someday we might. But for now, it's just 2 days. We in the United States live our lives in a secular orientation. There are certainly Christians among us, devout Christians, church-going Christians, Christians who follow all the rules. And then there are the rest of us. And the proportion of the population who are Christians of all denominations who follow the rules has shrunk since I was your age, younger. And the number of people who just sort of let it hang, just sort of are Americans secularly but not religiously, has grown. The question is, for our time, can we have in America, a United States, a Western country that does not reflect Christianity as its primary core set of values? That's a real question, because the republic that we have is based on a Christian population, a population that self-restrains in a certain way in order to comply with holy law. If we don't have that anymore, what is going to keep Americans from abusing their freedom, taking advantage of the republic, and turning us into a dictatorship again? That's a real question. And those of you who really love the whole separation of church and state thing, that's something for you to grapple with. Because there's no guarantee on God's green earth that a non-Christian American population, either secular humanists, atheists, agnostics, it's very unlikely that we would become a Muslim nation, but still possible. None of those groups have produced a functioning free society. We have. We being Judeo-Christian Americans. The question is whether we can survive the loss of Christianity as our core belief. And if you doubt the loss of Christianity as our core belief, consider the ongoing, ever-continuing campaign to de-Christianize society. You say Merry Christmas to somebody, and throughout your lifetime it's been, how dare you say Merry Christmas? What if I'm not a Christian? What if I'm a Buddhist? My answer to that is, then you wish me a benevolent Buddha day. You wish me a Kwasi Kwanzaa, super solstice. You wish me a happy Hanukkah. You do whatever the heck you want. But in a society with free speech and freedom of religion, I'm going to express my Christianity. And if you don't like it, you express your non-Christianity. And we'll enjoy our free speech. But that isn't what has been happening. What people have been encouraging is, don't you mention religion. No, no, no. You might offend somebody. To which I say, if you're going through life and you're not offending people, what is wrong with you?
Exactly.
And if you're going through life being offended by everyone, I repeat, what is wrong with you? Do you think the world owes you peace of mind? The world doesn't owe you a damn thing. You were born. You're lucky. Darwin says you're the descendant of survivors, so act like one. Don't act like a fading violet. Don't act like a delicate little crystalline goblet. Be an adult. If people don't agree with your beliefs, that means they're normal. Yeah, this irritates me. But what if somebody's not a Christian? Big deal! Then they're not. Then they can celebrate whatever the heck they are. Well, they're an anti-Christian. Then they're nothing. Being an anti-something is not enough. You've got to be for something, too. For the longest time, I was an anti-communist, but it took me a long time to realize that isn't enough. I've got to be for something. I am for something. Anyway, it's the opposite. In the Middle Ages, church and state support one another. They're separate. And the God and his church are at the center of everything. In other words, everyone goes to church in the community. It's expected. If you don't, you have to account for yourself. I'll say that again. Everyone goes to church. If you don't, you have to account for your presence to your priest and to your Lord. You are expected to go to church. And to your neighbors, they expect you to as well. You are expected to tithe to the church. That means give a tenth of your gross income. That's tithing. That's Deuteronomic law. Do people do that? Well, a few do today. Not many, but a few. If you have a day off, it is because it is a holy day. I love how the anti-Christian people love to say happy holidays. Oh, so you don't want me to say Merry Christmas, but you want instead to say happy holy days? Oh yes, that's much more enlightened and atheistic than Christmas, because it reflects all holy days. But if you're an atheist, you don't believe in holy days, except perhaps Karl Marx's birthday. So, let's see. Happy holy. So no, in the Middle Ages, they have holy days throughout the year. Lots of different saints' days. And maybe you'll get off from work, or maybe you'll have half a day of work, or maybe you'll have special privileges. You're born. The church, not the state, keeps records of your birth. Who your parents are when you were baptized. You die. The church, not the state, keeps records of your death and buries you. The longer you go back in studying your family history, your genealogy, the longer you go back, the more you rely on church records rather than government records. Because the government really doesn't care about you except as a taxpayer. So, you grow up. You go to confession. You go to communion. The church is involved in that. You die. There's last rites. The church is involved with that. You get married. The church is involved in that. You become a priest, monk, or a nun. The church is obviously involved in that. God and his church are at the center of all things. You know how people are called together? For anything? Church bells. Church bells. Ding, 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 ding. You show up. There's an emergency. You got to help out. There's a fire. You got to help put it out. You come together. There's a holiday. There's a special visit of the king. Church bells call people together because they are the only mass communication system that they have. And everyone in the community gets together at church. Church is not an onerous burden. Church is where you see your neighbors. The other 6 days of the week, you're working. At church, you see everyone. You wear your Sunday best for God, to show respect, and you wear your Sunday best also on a secondary vanity level to be seen by your neighbors. God and his church are at the center of all things. For the first 1,000 years of our existence, till the end of the Middle Ages, it is Christianity more than anything else that defines us. This is so different from now. That's why I spent all this time on it. Now, in the Dark Ages, you've got a Romanized lower class. By blood, they might be Italians, they might be Celts, they might be early Germans, they might be Britons, which are a variant of Celt, they might be Celt-Iberians, which is a variety of Celt, but they are Romanized. These are the people that were blended into Romanization, by Romanization, into Roman ways of thinking. They speak Latin, they are Roman Catholic in religion. They work the fields. I'll turn the heat up a little bit. I have a feeling some people are cold. So the fact that some of you, you are the one who chose to sit in front of it. Dan didn't have any problems.
Yeah, come on now. Actually, it was kind of cold, but
Yeah,
I'm not going to complain about it.
No, it's true. If you want to move over there out of the fan blast, you can, but I need the fan up for me. So I've turned the heat up, though. So hopefully those of you who are cold, because you don't have a giant extra fatty layer protecting you, will be in more comfort.
I just don't have circulation in my fingers.
Oh, okay.
That's the only
Then you've got to do this all the time.
That
And you can do this, too. You'll look like a villain that way. It's a good look.
He isn't a turtleneck, I mean.
Okay. So, who rules over the Romans? Well, first of all, you got to understand, the population of the Roman Empire goes down with the fall of the empire. Lots of people die of starvation because the old system of farms and growing simply was not able to continue under the barbarians. So, with the fall of civilization and the rise of the Dark Ages is what can only be described as a massive die-off. That is, lots of people die. If we have another Dark Age, the same thing will happen to us. Because our current global population is based on, among other things, chemical fertilizers, industrial farming methods, and a global trade network. And if we have trouble with any of those three, we end up with food shortages. And if we have food shortages, you will see society descend into an anarchy for a while. And then strongmen and warlords and nasty Dark Age stuff. Hopefully that won't happen in our lifetimes. Hopefully. Because it's unpleasant to contemplate.
I just have a question. How do you feel about the use of like genetically modifying like foods and stuff?
We've been genetically modifying foods since the beginning.
Yeah.
We call it, horticulture.
Yeah.
Personally, it rubs me the wrong way because it suddenly feels like they're playing with the DNA of strawberries, and that seems creepy to me. And it seems like you're unlocking Pandora's box of a new set of diseases we've never encountered before. So I get that. But at the same time, if we all did completely organic farming, about 4/5 of the world's population would die. The artificially high 7 billion plus people that we have depend upon cutting edge industrial agriculture. And those kind of genetically modified plants are a part of that. So, as much as it creeps me out, I have to admit that probably it's a good idea. Or at least probably it will keep people fed who otherwise might starve. I guess. What do you think before I go on?
I think that like the thing is like people buy like all organic foods, like and that's great, but like again we have like 8 billion. We nearly have like 8 billion people on this planet,
Mhm.
and you gotta find some way to feed everybody. And the fact that we're able to feed for 7 billion people
Is an amazing blessing. I'll tell you, there's a horrible movie that I've never seen all the way through because it's just too dark. It was made around 1970 called Soylent Green.
Oh, I love that movie.
Good
Oh,
for
is
you,
that
Dan.
is that the hot dog factory?
No.
Or was that
Soylent Green is
it?
a story about a world that has overpopulation
Yeah.
and no food. And
Yeah.
so what they do is they eat soy and lentil mix, which
Yeah.
gives protein. Soylent Red, Soylent whatever, and then there's Soylent Green. But what the main character discovers to his horror is that Soylent Green is actually not soybeans and lentils, it's people.
Yeah.
And
That's the plot of Forward.
yeah, well, there you go. Nothing is original.
Wally's also animated though.
Yeah, Wally is not as dark as Soylent Green. Trust me.
Have you seen the theories on Wally?
No, I've never seen Wally.
Oh,
You haven't seen Wally?
I've avoided it.
Why?
It just creeped me out. I don't want intelligent little robots. They're Cylon wannabes. What? Yeah.
No, I was just gonna just like with
Yeah.
and then the thing was like I think genetically modifying like animals,
Mhm.
like DNA that can actually like
It's just
that's
called selective breeding.
I know exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. No, and that's what we've been doing from the
Yeah,
beginning.
but even so, I think that that's also a good thing, like
Yeah.
because we're able to feed more people, and even like they're born to be like we're gonna eat them regardless. And
Yes,
like,
that's
if
what
you're
the
gonna-
point is. The reason there are so many cows and pigs is they're
Yeah.
useful to
If
us.
we're gonna like let's say like if you are breeding cows to have like larger muscle mass or something like
Yeah.
that, the cows are like they're not gonna feel any like
No.
bad effects that
No.
are gonna go against them because they're not gonna live long enough to actually feel those effects.
Right.
If you have a cow that's gonna have like far more body mass than it should,
Mhm.
and in 5 years it's gonna be feeling arthritis.
Now,
and,
you got to understand. No, it's not going to live
Yeah.
all those years.
No.
But if you have a cow in a stall its entire life,
Yeah.
it's livestock. Okay, it's not an intelligent life form. But it is going to creep out any normal person out. Look, just like most people who don't grow up on farms, when it's slaughter time, they're not around. They don't understand.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else? Okay. Yes.
So, I went to Disneyland over spring break, and they have
Speaking of creepy places.
yeah,
Yes.
right, in Florida, and
Yeah.
they have like I can't remember exactly which one it was, but they have a greenhouse there and like a little boat tour that takes you through like the past of agriculture and stuff.
Oh.
And then you go into this green room, and it's huge. It's a huge green room
Mhm.
with like plants, and they're experimenting with the plants on how to grow things more efficiently. Is how they explained it.
Yeah.
Like growing vertically and like shorter, so we can fit more in at higher.
Interesting. So skyscrapers.
Basically, plant skyscrapers, and I just thought it was so fascinating because see, greenhouses you expect like shelves and stuff, but they had like tomato plants that were hanging from like a wire
Interesting.
thing, and they
Well-
had plants on top of it.
The way the world works is so fascinating. When I wrote a curriculum K through 12, I made sure that elementary school students learned about how things are made. There's a show on TV called How Things Are Made. Most of us don't have a clue how this stuff gets made, how we get all this stuff. Also, the truth is, most of the fruits and vegetables that we count on are new. Until about 200 years ago, you couldn't eat tomatoes because they were part of the deadly nightshade plant. They hadn't been bred to the point where you could eat them. And the same is true of modern melons or strawberries. They didn't exist in Roman times. They looked like something else, or they had much less edible stuff and much more useless stuff. So we've been shaping life like a sculptor molding clay. That's humans have done that since the beginning of agriculture, 10,000 years ago. The Soylent Green reference was the fact that we are so lucky we're not in that situation, and we're not in that situation because of industrial agriculture. By the way, if your family is wealthy enough to afford just buying organic stuff, that's good for you. I have no problem with wealth, but it takes money to buy, grass-fed beef and purely organic turnips and everything else. It's not cheap. It's inefficient and it's expensive. So go ahead and eat your organic foods. You're supporting the economy. That's a good thing. Okay. So the Romans they become the workers, and there are millions of them. This is the point. Millions of Romans. You know how many Germans there are? Maybe 100 or 200,000. Don't ever think that numbers are everything. You get a town of 1,000 or 2,000 people, and 50 or 75 armed biker dudes who have a Mad Max attitude ride into town on their hogs, and they start killing people. Most people will fall in line. The natural form of government in this world is a dictatorship of one kind or another, because the rule of force works. You've got to understand this. The Roman Empire, had it stood up, had its men gotten into uniform, learned how to fight, and fought bravely, would never have been conquered by the Goths or the Germans. But they were, because they were not warlike anymore. There's a lesson there somewhere. If we get too peaceful, it is entirely possible that the more masculine, manly-oriented societies of the world will conquer us. And you can't do it all with push buttons. You got to have soldiers and Marines to take and hold ground. And that means you need manly men, and if you want, Amazonic women. You cannot do it with robots. And if you could, why would they need us anyway? So the fact that that 100 or 200,000 Germanic barbarians conquered millions and millions of Romans is a lesson. Think about it. Try to see that happening today. Now, I have bikers riding into a farming town, but look at any city neighborhood. Look at the city neighborhood where I grew up, in the Bronx. You got street gangs. The street gangs are only a small number of people, but they're vicious, they're aggressive, and they control the streets, where everyone has to go. You can't stay in your apartment all the time or you'll starve. You need to go to the streets to shop. You need to go through the streets to work. You need to go through the streets if you're going to do any recreation. If you're going to meet people, if you're going to meet your special someone and marry them, to go to church, to go to the hospital. And the streets are controlled not by the police, exactly, but by the street gangs. It's not numbers. It's attitude and skill at violence. How many bullies are there in any given playground? Usually one or two. Sometimes they help each other, sometimes they each have their own corner of the playground. But if people got together and stood up to them as a one unit, the bullies they'd have their butts kicked. Because bullies tend to be cowards. They tend to go after the weak. They're like lions. Lions don't go, I want the strongest wildebeest, because the strongest wildebeest will kill them. I want a sick and old wildebeest, because then I eat, and then they die. The circle of life. That's what bullies do. They look for nerds, geeks, and other people who are vulnerable. They do. I know this. So, do people stand up? Do people come together in solidarity, link arms, and say, "No, bully, no. Hands are for helping, not for hurting. And we're going to help you." No.
We're gonna help you get that far.
We only want to help you. Yeah.
I have a story about.
Sure.
Oh my god, you were bullied.
No, so
Some of you need to
there
be
is
bullied.
this.
Go
There
on.
is this kid who was apparently a bully.
Yeah.
But when I was little, I didn't really realize that. So I befriended him for some reason and was
Okay.
like, nice to him. And then people were like, "Oh, he's such a bad kid. He bullies everyone." And I'm like, "No, he isn't. He's so nice. He's like one of my friends." And then as I got older, I realized the reason why I didn't have many friends in elementary school was because I was friends
Friends with
with
the
a
bully. That's interesting. Normally, okay, you must have hit the bully just right in innocence, because if you were being friends with the bully to avoid his nonsense, he would have detected that and he would have gone for you. But you clearly just happened to meet him in a neutral way as a person.
Yeah, and
That's
for
cool.
some reason,
That's an interesting insight. But yeah, no, that would certainly happen. Is he still a bully now? Do you have any context?
No, he goes to a different school, but I met him and he seems a lot more nice.
Well, bullies do grow up often. I mean, I can't count the number of times, you hear of people saying, I was a real jerk in high school, but I grew up. It happens. You know who the best cops are? People who were thugs in high school. People who were bullies. You know why? They have the skills. They know how to intimidate people. They can use violence. They're not afraid to. But they grow up and they stop being wolves and they start being sheepdogs. And that's what a good cop is. Unfortunately, since the 70s, a lot of police officers are not chosen because they were former bullies or former soldiers, veterans, whatever. They're chosen because they go to college and get good grades. So instead of having big, hulking cops that you don't want to mess with, you got little cops with glasses. And you end up, this is a true story, there was a domestic dispute and some of the new cops showed up in my mom's last year as a police officer. And her experience was teaching in the Southeast Bronx. Trust me, she had attitude. And the new cops show up and they say, "Police, open up." And the guy opens up and he's like twice the bulk of both of them. And he looks down and he says, "Come back with real cops." Slam. And he goes back to it, and they come back with real cops. But no, it was complete lack of respect. The only thing these little guys could do is shoot them dead, and eventually they would have tasers. But even then, no, send us real cops. It's because of that. You expect police to be able to enforce the law with their intimidation factor.
This is kind of random. I heard the story that neighbors had heard screaming and just a house, and so they called the police and they thought that it was a domestic dispute just going on.
Yeah.
A man who was screaming at his girlfriend, wife or something, and the police came. They knocked on his door. He opened the door and he was visibly angry. He said, "Are you okay, sir?" And they went, "Yeah, I'm assembling IKEA furniture." And that's literally what actually happened. It's an actual story where he was assembling IKEA furniture. They went into the house, searched it. There was no one else there, and just sitting on a living room was a table.
Let me tell you, when my wife and I realized as young marrieds that we were living in somebody else's situation comedy, our lives were a sitcom. Okay, it's July in Connecticut, which is much more humid than it ever gets here. It was over 100 degrees at night, and the air was just filled with moisture. We go out to a place and get some do-it-yourself bookshelves because we're both intellectuals. We get lots of books, even then. So as we get these bookshelves, we put them into my Honda Civic, which is a hatchback, but the bookshelves will fall out. So Tina gets in back, and she's sitting on the bookshelves as we're going over bumpy Connecticut roads, and then there's one hill that is 45 degrees straight up, and you wind. And she's like, "Ah!" She almost falls out. We finally get up that hill, get back to the house, take the bookshelves, put them into our apartment, and she's assembling one part of the shelves. I'm doing the other, and we're going to put them together. And after 45 minutes, she goes, "Ah!" And I go, "What?" And she goes, "Look." And they're inside out. Her part was inside out. They had to be taken apart and put back together right side in. At that point, I said, we're in a sitcom. Somebody is looking at us and laughing, and if it's God, he's got a sense of humor because, damn. So, yeah.
Yeah. Elementary school is weird. So, back to the bully that you just reminded me. In like 4th grade, I started receiving these tiny little notes in like my desk in my cubby, and they were like half death threats, half like really.
Whoa,
notes.
whoa,
Like,
whoa!
no, things like "I hope you have a heart attack." Like it was weird.
That's not a good thing. You can't.
No, okay. So then,
I don't think she thinks it is, Tan.
one day, I like every time I see a note in my locker now, I'm like, I don't like that.
That's
like,
creepy.
It was.
That'd be so
And-
funny though.
Did you
honestly.
find out who?
Yes, it was the same kid that I had befriended. And the reason why, he framed it. He wrote notes, and then he wrote my friends that I had, their names on it. And the reason
He was
did
trying
all
to
that-
separate
That
you
would
from
be
them.
so
Yes,
funny.
exactly. Because
I would
he
love
was
to watch
angry
that.
that I was friends with other
Have you
people
ever
other
heard-
than him, and I'm like,
Bro.
Okay, that's not a good sign. That's the sign of somebody who's such a jealous boyfriend
Oh my god.
that he can't handle you having a
You know
life.
how
Great.
funny that'd be,
Oh my
though?
gosh.
Funny so
That's creepy. I'm glad that you. I mean, I hope he grows up. I really do.
I remember that, and I was like, that kind of makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Why he wrote those notes.
Yeah.
Because he wanted me to be friends.
Daniel's gonna try to give someone a psychotic break.
I'm not gonna do that, but I would love to see someone do that. So,
You're like, just
What about
wait,
to
I'm
you?
coming for you,
yeah,
Dad.
I'd laugh still.
Okay.
Yeah. Little 4th grader just
That's
getting a
good.
note, and it's like, I hope you have a heart attack. Your best friend. And it's like, what?
So you can go to God and be with Him and be happy in heaven.
Yeah, that's
Anyway, understand, conquest happens through attitude and a willingness to do violence, and that's how bullies do their thing. Now, the rise of the kingdoms. In Western Europe, 4 kingdoms develop. Merovingian France, the kingdom of the Franks, which is eventually going to become Charlemagne's. That's the biggest, and that's the central one. Because if you look at Western Europe, France is in the middle of everything. Then you've got Visigothic Spain. Now, Visigothic Spain is set up southeast of France, southwest of France, and it's there until the Muslims come. And then there's Muslim Spain with a few Visigothic kingdoms up here in the Cantabrian Alps. So they're there for a while, and then they're gone. Lombard Italy. After the Byzantines get kicked out of Italy, northern Italy anyway is ruled by the Lombards, and they form the basis for a kingdom of Italy. And Anglo-Saxon England, which we're going to learn a lot about because our country comes largely from the English tradition. And this is 3 tribes. The Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes come across the North Sea, land in Rome, what it was Roman Britain, and they conquer what will become Angloland, the kingdom of the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes, or England. So these are the regions of Europe that we're going to be going to. What's interesting is Germany does not become yet an organized kingdom, because the barbarians that came from here are still barbarians back here. It's in the Roman lands that you end up with organized large-scale kingdoms. Germany has the tribal lands of the Saxons and other tribes, but it's like in the good old days. The Germans won the war, so why would they become all namby-pamby civilized like the areas of Rome that they conquered? No, we are prime Germans. We live in forest. We drink beer. We have war for sport. Now, what unifies all of this is the Western Latin or Catholic Church. It is true for a while, and I've got to put this in here, that is for the lower class, the former Romans. Okay? The upper class is Arian Christianity. Which are Germans, Goths and Germans. Now, to be clear, it's not A-R-Y-A-N, Germanic bloodline. It's A-R-I-A-N for Arius. We've talked about this. And this difference between the upper-class Germans and Goths, who are Arian Christians, and the lower-class, formerly Roman population, who are Catholic Christians, is going to be one of the things that persists for hundreds of years. And it's going to be something that stands in the way of real settlement. The Germans think of themselves as a people apart because they're not those stupid Catholics. And the Catholics think of their rulers as a bunch of invading conquerors because they're Arian Christians. They're not real Christians. They're not Roman Catholic Christians. So this difference in religion is going to be a big deal from the late 400s AD until the late 700s AD, and longer in other places besides France. But the Catholic Church, because it's the church of the majority of the population, and because it's organized in a way the Arian Christians are not, is something that the governments of the kingdoms have to start negotiating with. In fact, the Catholic Church helps build the kingdoms. The Catholic Church helps organize these barbarian countries and make them less than barbarians. So the Catholic Church is the most important partner that any king can have. It's also the Western Church, the Latin Church. I call it the Catholic Church for simplicity, but it's not exactly the same thing as the modern Roman Catholic Church. Modern Roman Catholic Church is, 1,000 or more years later, and there's been a lot of changes. This is the early Catholic Church, the Western Catholic Church, the Latin Church. Now, the Pope. The Bishop of Rome has a favorite title. Gregory the Great comes up with this. His favorite title is Servant of the Servants of Christ. Who are you? I am the servant of the servants of Christ. Now, where does this come from? Well, there's a time in Jesus' life where he takes oil and bathes the feet of his followers. Now, in the Middle East, remember, desert country, not enough water, dust everywhere, people wear sandals. Feet are disgusting. Even now, if you show the bottom of your feet to somebody in the Middle East, that's an insult. It's like giving them the finger. When President George W. Bush was in Iraq at a news conference, a terrorist-loving Arab reporter took his shoe off and threw it at President Bush. Bush, who was a pretty athletic guy, dodged it without any trouble, but that was considered to be an insult. In fact, what people did to first show their freedom from Saddam Hussein in Iraq, the dictator that Bush overthrew, was they took their shoes off and they smacked Saddam's statue face with their shoes. Okay? So a person's feet in the Middle East, the thought of a rabbi, a religious teacher, cleansing the feet of his followers is shocking. It's like Saturnalia on steroids. And people ask Jesus, why are you doing this? And Jesus, he says something about the servant, the importance of the servant. The servant is actually, yes, please.
So I can't remember word for word, but
Please
his
go.
general message was that people who submit themselves to the will of God will serve other people. They will be first in line to get to heaven. Then the people like the Pharisees who think they're all high and mighty, but they're going to be last because they don't serve.
So the last will be first and the first will be last.
Yes.
And this has to do with the joy and glory of service. If you're serving someone, you're useful. If you're being served, it's a little less useful, isn't it? So Jesus is showing that a leader should be a servant. And Pope Gregory picks up on this. Remember, Pope Leo the Great was the pope that gets rid of Attila. After the fall of Rome in the 500s AD, Pope Gregory is the first Benedictine monk pope. And he is hardcore. And he basically establishes the medieval Christian church in Rome. And his favorite title is Servant of the Servants of Christ. So, the servants of Christ are the priests, monks, nuns, church elders, presbyters, bishops. Everyone who is part of the church is the servants of Christ. And I'm their servant. I'm here to make sure that all of my servants have what they need to serve the people. So there's the laity, the common everyday Christian believer. Then there's the servants of Christ. Then there's me, the servant of the servants of Christ. And this attitude of the leader serving is one of the best things to come out of Western civilization. Not all noblemen have this. A lot of noblemen basically believe they are above the peasantry. They're better than. And there's a contempt, a looking down for. A true leader understands. It's an honor to lead. It is a privilege to lead. Because you're entrusted with the care of other people. Leadership isn't about you being vain and egotistical. Leadership is about you using your talent in a way that's going to help more people. You as a leader, your job is to take care of the people under you. That's good leadership. That's why in the army, a good officer or sergeant makes sure that his men have food and are bedded down well before he eats dinner himself. And a good leader does what the men do. He eats what the men eat. I'm old-fashioned. I use the term men. I know it's people today. And I honor the service of females, so I guess I should change that, but I'm old. And I don't want to. But I'll try, maybe, I guess. In any event, servant of the servants of Christ. So there's an attitude towards leadership there that's very quintessentially Christian. Now, another thing that Pope Gregory does, aside from organizing the church efficiently, to backstop the kingdoms and to even displace the government in places where the government is failing, is Gregory comes up with a new kind of music, which is the first kind of music we actually know about. We don't know what Greeks and Romans listened to as they played music to themselves. Instead, we only know about Gregorian chants from the Middle Ages and the Catholic Church. So, Gregorian chant is I do not sing well.
You sing amazing.
Oh.
Join us.
I should, because then I'd learn how to sing in tune. The problem is I start singing and then I have this illusion that I'm singing well, and then my tune goes, and it's horrible.
You create your own.
Yeah, they don't let you do that. The universe calls that stupid. So, in any event, maybe I should at some point. I'm tempted to. I just don't have time. So, the idea is that this new music, this music of the voice and only the voice, of men singing together to God, singing the Psalms, singing new songs, is going to put people into a holy frame of mind. Like going into a church and smelling incense and hearing the organ music and seeing the light coming through the stained glass and everything's clean and you're at your pew, you're at your bench, and you kneel and you pray and you see the cross or the crucifix and any holy art that's in there. It's all designed to put you in a certain frame of mind, a sacred frame of mind, a holy frame of mind. Because the word sacred and holy means apart from regular life. This is separate. This is reserved for God. That's what holy or sacred means. It's not normal. It's separate, sacred, reserved for God. So Gregory is probably one of the most important popes ever. Because what Gregory does is he reorganizes the church to be the powerhouse that it becomes in the Middle Ages. He organizes the imperial papacy, if you want to call it that, which is, since the church is the only thing that stretches across and beyond the old Roman Empire throughout half a dozen kingdoms or more, that the Pope and the church structure is apart from, separate from the government, that is independent of the government. That's key. Talk about a separation of church and state. Folks, the separation of church and state is not designed to protect the poor whittled government from the scary, hairy Christians. The government has weapons, and the troops to use them, the church does not. In fact, the archetype of the church, the founder of the Christian church, Jesus Christ, chose to die a criminal's death rather than fight. So, the separation of church and state is not to protect the state, it's to protect the church. And Gregory sets up a church strong enough to stand up to the kings. That's what you need to know. I think what I'm going to do is leave it there. And we will continue next time. Any questions, comments, or thoughts? Okay, we're done.